In the thin air of the Andes Mountains, where oxygen becomes a precious commodity and ancient secrets whisper through windswept peaks, early Spanish explorers documented encounters that defied rational explanation. Their journals, hidden in colonial archives for centuries, speak of something that stalked the high altitudes, a creature they called El Haulador de la Montaña, the Mountain Howler. These weren't tales spun around campfires or embellishments meant to secure funding for future expeditions. These were official reports, signed testimonies, and desperate letters home that painted a picture of terror at 14,000 feet above sea level. The conquistadors who had faced down entire civilizations, who had carved their way through uncharted wilderness with steel and gunpowder, wrote with trembling hands about sounds that turned their blood to ice and shadows that move against the natural order of the world. What did they encounter in those desolate peaks? And why have modern scientists begun taking their accounts seriously? The year was 1547, and Captain Francisco de Orellana's expedition had been climbing for 3 days through what would later be known as the Cordillera Blanca. The men were exhausted, their pack animals struggling with the altitude, when the first howl echoed across the valley, a sound that would haunt their dreams for the rest of their lives. Brother Miguel Santos, the expedition's chronicler, described it in meticulous detail. A cry that began as the wail of a lost soul and transformed into something far more terrible. The roar of a beast that should not exist at such heights, where no creature that size could draw sufficient breath. The sound, he noted, seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously, creating an acoustic nightmare that left the entire expedition paralyzed with fear. But it wasn't just a sound that terrorized these hardened explorers. In the morning mist that clung to the mountainside, they claimed to see a figure, massive, bipedal, covered in what appeared to be thick, dark fur. It moved with impossible grace across terrain that would challenge even the most experienced mountaineers, disappearing and reappearing like a specter among the rocky outcroppings. The sightings weren't isolated to Orellana's expedition. Just 2 years later, in 1549, explorer Gonzalo Jimenez de Quesada's party encountered something similar while mapping the eastern slopes of the Andes. His lieutenant, Rodrigo de Torres, wrote in his personal journal about a creature that stood as tall as 2 men, with arms that reached nearly to the ground and eyes that reflected our torchlight like polished obsidian. What makes these early accounts particularly compelling is their consistency across multiple expeditions that had no contact with each other. The descriptions remain remarkably similar. A large, humanoid figure covered in coarse hair, possessing incredible strength and agility, and producing a vocalization that seemed to emanate from the very mountains themselves. The indigenous peoples of the region had their own name for this creature, Yukimar, a word that roughly translates to the one who brings a mountain's wrath. Local guides frequently refuse a venture into certain areas, speaking in hushed tones about valleys where the Yukimar was said to dwell. They describe it not as a mere animal, but as a guardian spirit of the high places, ancient and powerful beyond human understanding. Spanish colonial records from the period reveal that multiple expeditions reported equipment mysteriously destroyed, pack animals found dead with no apparent cause, and men who simply vanished during night watches. The psychological impact was so severe that several expeditions turned back prematurely, despite the promise of gold and glory that had driven them into the mountains. One particularly chilling account comes from the expedition of Pedro de Valdivia in 1551. His scout, Juan Morales, reported finding massive footprints in a high-altitude valley, prints that measured over 18 inches in length and showed what appeared to be opposable thumbs. The depth of the impression suggested a creature of enormous weight, yet the spacing indicated a stride length that seemed almost impossible for anything walking on 2 legs. The most disturbing aspect of these early encounters wasn't the creature's size or strength. It was its apparent intelligence. Multiple accounts described the Mountain Howler exhibiting behavior that suggested reasoning and strategy. It seemed to understand human movement patterns, often appearing ahead of expeditions as if predicting their routes. Some reports described it throwing rocks with uncanny accuracy, forcing groups to change direction or seek shelter. Brother Santos wrote extensively about what he believed was the creature's ability to mimic human voices. He claimed that on their 3rd night in the high country, members of the expedition heard calls for help that seemed to come from lost companions. When they investigated, Following the voices deeper into the mountain passes, they found nothing but silence and the overwhelming sensation of being watched from the darkness above. The psychological warfare was perhaps the most effective weapon in the Mountain Howler's arsenal. Even battle-hardened conquistadors, men who had faced down charging cavalry and survived brutal jungle warfare, found themselves unable to cope with the constant tension of the hunt. The creature seemed to understand that terror was more powerful than direct confrontation, using the isolation and harsh environment of the high Andes to maximize the impact of its presence. These early encounters established a pattern that would persist for centuries. Sightings of a large, intelligent humanoid creature in the high Andes, always accompanied by unexplained phenomena, and always leaving witnesses fundamentally changed by the experience. The Mountain Howler had announced itself to the world, and the mountains would never feel safe again. Long before Spanish boots ever touched Andean soil, the indigenous peoples of the region had woven the Mountain Howler into the very fabric of their mythology and daily existence. The creature existed in their oral traditions not as a monster to be feared, but as an ancient guardian whose presence predated human civilization in the mountains by millennia. The Inca, masters of high-altitude construction and mountain warfare, left behind quipus, knotted string records that modern scholars have painstakingly decoded. Hidden within these cryptic accounting systems are references to the tall ones of the upper world, beings that were neither human nor animal but something altogether different. These weren't casual mentions. They were systematic recordings that treated the Mountain Howler as a known factor in mountain logistics, something to be considered when planning construction projects or military campaigns. Archaeological evidence supports these ancient accounts in ways that make modern scientists profoundly uncomfortable. At sites like Ollantaytambo and Pumapunku, researchers have discovered carved stone reliefs depicting tall, humanoid figures with characteristics that don't match any known human population. These figures are consistently shown alongside human workers, suggesting not conflict, but coexistence or perhaps subservience. The Quechua people, descendants of the Inca, maintain detailed oral histories that speak of a time when the tall ones helped build the great stone cities of the high mountains. According to these traditions, the creatures possessed knowledge of stone-working techniques that humans couldn't master, able to cut and move blocks weighing hundreds of tons with seemingly supernatural ease. The precision of Inca stonework, which modern engineers still struggle to replicate, may have had assistance that historians have been reluctant to acknowledge. But the relationship wasn't always harmonious. Quechua legends also speak of a great conflict, a war between humans and the tall ones that lasted for generations. The mountains themselves became a battlefield, with entire valleys said to have been reshaped by the violence. The Yucumar, in these older stories, weren't guardians but refugees, the last survivors of a species that once ruled the high places. Petroglyphs found in remote Andean caves tell a similar story through images rather than words. Dating techniques place some of these rock carvings at over 8,000 years old, showing tall figures with elongated limbs and what appear to be tools or weapons unknown to human populations of the time. Most disturbing are the scenes that appear to depict hunting, but in these images, humans are clearly the prey. The Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon, writing in 1553, noted that indigenous guides would make elaborate offerings at certain mountain passes, leaving food, coca leaves, and work gold at specific sites. When pressed for explanations, the guide spoke of payments to the old ones and keeping the peace with those who came before. These weren't simple nature worship or mountain spirit veneration. They were described as contractual obligations, tributes paid to maintain safe passage through territories that belonged to someone else. Linguistic analysis of pre-Columbian languages reveals another layer of a mystery. The word Yucumar appears in multiple indigenous tongues across South America, from the Amazon basin to the southern cone, always with similar connotations. This suggests either widespread cultural exchange about a shared mythological figure or, more disturbingly, widespread encounters with the same type of creature across vast geographical distances. The chronological timeline becomes even more intriguing when examining the sudden abandonment of certain high-altitude settlements. Archaeological sites like Ciudad Perdida and numerous unnamed ruins show signs of rapid evacuation, with valuable items left behind and no evidence of warfare or natural disaster. The abandonment dates cluster around specific periods, suggesting coordinated responses to some common threat. Modern DNA analysis of hair and tissue samples found in caves associated with Yukimar legends has yielded puzzling results. While some samples are clearly from known animals, others show genetic markers that don't match any catalog species. The samples contain DNA sequences that appear to be primate in origin, but with chromosomal arrangements that don't exist in any living primate population. Climatological data adds another dimension to the historical puzzle. Ice core samples from Andean glaciers show unusual atmospheric disturbances during periods that correspond with peak Yukimar activity in oral traditions. These disturbances suggest the presence of large populations of breathing organisms at altitudes where such populations shouldn't be sustainable. The most compelling evidence may be hiding in plain sight within the architectural marvels that tourists visit daily. Recent analysis using ground-penetrating radar has revealed extensive cave systems beneath major Inca sites. Caves that were clearly modified by intelligent beings, but show none of the tool marks typical of human construction. These underground networks stretch for miles to the mountains, connecting sites that are separated by supposedly impassable terrain. Perhaps most unsettling is the discovery of what archaeologists have termed the silence layers, geological strata within Andean cave systems that show no signs of animal habitation for extended periods. These layers suggest that entire ecosystems were periodically abandoned, as if all animal life fled the mountain simultaneously. The timing of these events corresponds eerily with periods of increased Yukimar activity in indigenous oral histories. The ancient origins of the Mountain Howler mystery extend far deeper into history than Spanish colonial records suggest. This wasn't a creature that appeared with the arrival of European explorers. It was something that had been shaping human civilization in the Andes for thousands of years, leaving traces in genetics, archaeology, and collective memory that we're only beginning to understand. By the 18th century, the Mountain Howler had evolved from conquistador nightmare to scholarly curiosity. European naturalists, armed with the scientific method and an insatiable hunger for discovery, began approaching the mystery with systematic investigation rather than superstitious fear. What they found in the high Andes would challenge everything they thought they knew about the natural world. Baron Alexander von Humboldt, the renowned Prussian explorer, encountered the creature during his 1802 expedition through the northern Andes. Unlike the terrified accounts of earlier explorers, Humboldt approached the phenomenon with scientific rigor. His detailed field notes, preserved in Berlin's Natural History Archives, describe multiple encounters of what he termed an unknown primate species of exceptional size and intelligence. Humboldt's most significant contribution was his systematic documentation of physical evidence. He collected plaster casts of footprints, samples of hair caught on vegetation, and detailed measurements of what appeared to be constructed shelters in areas far above the tree line. His anatomical training allowed him to analyze the footprint casts with unprecedented precision, noting the presence of a flexible midfoot structure that didn't exist in any known primate species. The hair samples presented an even greater puzzle. Under microscopic examination, they showed characteristics that were simultaneously human-like and alien. The medullary structure was too complex for any known animal, while the cortical arrangement suggested adaptations for extreme cold that exceeded anything found in Arctic-adapted mammals. Humboldt noted that the hair remained pliable and showed no signs of degradation even after months of storage, suggesting an unknown protein composition. Charles Darwin himself would later examine Humboldt's samples during his own South American expedition. In a letter to his sister Caroline, Darwin wrote, "The specimens Humboldt collected present characteristics that challenge our fundamental understanding of primate evolution. If these samples are genuine, and I have no reason to doubt Humboldt's methodology, we may be observing a branch of development that diverged from known evolutionary paths far earlier than we previously imagined." The British Royal Geographic Society funded multiple expeditions specifically to investigate the Mountain Howler phenomenon during the Victorian era. The most comprehensive was led by Sir James Mackenzie in 1847, whose team included a photographer, naturalist, medical doctor, and geological surveyor. Their 6-month expedition produced what remains one of the most thorough scientific investigations of the creature ever attempted. Mackenzie's team employed innovative tracking techniques, using a combination of traditional hunting methods and cutting-edge Victorian technology. They deployed tripwire cameras at strategic locations, scattered plaster powder to capture footprints, and even attempted to use trained bloodhounds to follow scent trails. The results were both fascinating and disturbing. The photographic evidence, though limited by the technology of the era, captured several images of what appeared to be a large, bipedal figure moving across distant ridgelines. The photographs, analyzed by experts of the Royal Society, showed consistent anatomical proportions across multiple shots, suggesting either a remarkably elaborate hoax or genuine documentation of an unknown species. More troubling were the team's medical findings. Dr. William Harrison, the expedition's physician, documented physiological effects in team members that couldn't be explained by altitude or environmental stress alone. Men exposed to prolonged proximity to the creature showed elevated stress hormones, disrupted sleep patterns, and what Harrison termed acoustic hypersensitivity, an increased sensitivity to sound that persisted for months after returning to sea level. The geological survey revealed another layer of mystery. The team discovered extensive cave systems that showed clear signs of modification by intelligent beings, but with construction techniques that didn't match any known human culture. The caves contained what appeared to be ventilation systems carved directly into living rock, creating air circulation patterns that maintained consistent temperature and humidity levels despite the extreme altitude. Most significantly, the caves contained what the team described as workshops, areas where stone had been worked with precision that exceeded contemporary human capabilities. Tool marks in these areas showed patterns that suggested the use of implements unknown to any human culture, creating cuts and shaping that modern engineers would struggle to replicate even with industrial equipment. The expedition's naturalist, Thomas Fletcher, documented plant and animal behavior that suggested the presence of a large predator in the ecosystem. Small mammal populations showed distribution patterns that indicated avoidance of specific territories, while bird migration routes seemed to deliberately bypass certain valleys. Most intriguing were the behavioral adaptations in local wildlife that suggested long-term coevolution with an unknown species. Fletcher's botanical studies revealed another puzzle: the discovery of plant species that existed nowhere else in the world, growing in microclimates that seemed to be artificially maintained. These plants showed characteristics that suggested selective cultivation over extremely long periods, as if someone had been practicing agriculture at altitudes where agriculture shouldn't be possible. The expedition's most controversial finding was what they termed the boneyards, areas where large quantities of animal remains had been systematically arranged. The arrangement patterns showed clear intelligence, but the sorting methodology didn't match any known human burial or refused practices. More disturbing was the discovery of human remains among the animal bones, arranged in the same systematic patterns. Carbon dating of these remains, conducted decades later as the technology became available, revealed ages spanning thousands of years. The human bones showed evidence of having been processed in the same manner as the animal remains, suggesting that whatever intelligence was responsible for these sites didn't distinguish between human and animal prey. The Mackenzie expedition's most unsettling discovery came in their final weeks in the mountains. The team found evidence of what appeared to be surveillance, carefully constructed observation points overlooking their campsites, positioned to provide complete visual coverage of their activities. These positions showed signs of recent use, suggesting that the team's investigators had themselves been under investigation throughout their stay. When the expedition returned to London, their findings created a sensation in scientific circles. However, the implications were so disturbing that much of their evidence was quietly archived rather than published. The Royal Geographic Society, facing pressure from religious authorities and concern about public reaction, classified large portions of the expedition's findings as sensitive materials that remain restricted to this day. The Victorian-era investigations established the Mountain Howler as more than folklore. They documented it as a genuine mystery deserving of scientific attention. But they also revealed that this mystery was far more complex and potentially threatening than anyone had imagined. The 20th century brought the Mountain Howler mystery into direct conflict with established scientific orthodoxy. As anthropology and primatology developed into rigorous academic disciplines, the creature became a battleground between those who insisted on empirical evidence and those who argued that absence of proof wasn't proof of absence. The controversy erupted into public view in 1924 when renowned anthropologist Dr. Margaret Harrison published her groundbreaking paper, Primate Anomalies of the High Andes, in the Journal of Physical Anthropology. Harrison had spent 3 years studying indigenous oral traditions and collecting physical evidence in Peru and Bolivia. Her conclusions were explosive. The Mountain Howler represented either an unknown species of great ape or a relict population of early hominids that had survived in the isolated environment of the high Andes. The academic establishment's reaction was swift and brutal. Dr. Ernest Whitmore of Harvard's anthropology department led the charge against Harrison's work, publishing a scathing rebuttal that accused her of abandoning scientific rigor in favor of sensationalism. Whitmore argued that the evidence Harrison presented could be explained by misidentification of known animals, hoaxes perpetrated by local guides seeking to increase tourism, or the psychological effect of altitude sickness on observers. The debate intensified when Harrison presented physical evidence that seemed impossible to dismiss. She had collected hair samples from 14 different locations across a 500-mile stretch of the Andes, all showing identical microscopic characteristics that didn't match any catalog species. When challenged to provide the samples for independent analysis, Harrison discovered that they had mysteriously disappeared from her laboratory at Columbia University. The missing evidence controversy dominated anthropological journals for months. Harrison accused her critics of deliberately sabotaging her research, while skeptics pointed to the convenient disappearance as proof that the evidence had never been genuine. The academic community split into hostile camps, with careers destroyed and reputations ruined on both sides of the debate. Things became even more complicated in 1931 when famed explorer Roy Chapman Andrews returned from a Smithsonian expedition to the Andes with photographic evidence that seemed to support Harrison's claims. Andrews, whose credibility was unassailable after his dinosaur discoveries in Mongolia, presented a series of photographs showing what appeared to be a large, bipedal creature moving across a distant glacier. The photographs created a media sensation. Newspapers around the world ran stories about the Andes ape man, and public interest in the mystery reached fever pitch. However, the scientific community remained divided. Photo analysis experts pointed to various technical issues that could indicate fakery, while supporters argued that the images showed anatomical consistency across multiple frames that would be impossible to hoax with 1930s technology. The controversy took a dark turn when Andrews was found dead in his hotel room in La Paz, apparently from altitude sickness. His death occurred just days before he was scheduled to present additional evidence to a gathering of international anthropologists. The timing struck many as suspicious, leading to conspiracy theories that persist to this day. The Andrews incident had a chilling effect on Mountain Howler research. Scientists who had been preparing to mount their own expeditions quietly abandoned their plans. Funding for investigations dried up as universities distanced themselves from what had become a career-ending field of study. The creature that had once fascinated the scientific community became academic poison. World War II temporarily shifted attention away from the mystery, but the post-war era brought new players and new technologies to the investigation. In 1954, Soviet cryptozoologist Dr. Dmitry Volkov launched a comprehensive expedition funded by the USSR Academy of Sciences. The Soviets, with their different academic traditions and political motivations, were less constrained by Western scientific orthodoxy. Volkov's team employed military-grade equipment and systematic search techniques that had never before been applied to cryptozoological investigation. They established a network of remote monitoring stations throughout the Peruvian Andes, equipped with seismic sensors, infrared cameras, and audio recording equipment. The data they collected over 18 months revealed patterns that couldn't be explained by known wildlife activity. The seismic data showed regular movement patterns consistent with a large bipedal creature, with footfall signatures that indicated weights exceeding 800 pounds. The infrared cameras captured heat signatures that moved with impossible speed across terrain that would challenge experienced mountaineers. Most intriguingly, the audio recordings documented vocalizations that showed characteristics of both primate communication and something far more sophisticated. However, when Volkov attempted to publish his findings in Soviet scientific journals, he encountered unexpected resistance. His research was classified by the state and removed from public access. Volkov himself was reassigned to other projects and forbidden from discussing his Andean work. The Soviet silence was perhaps more telling than any published paper could have been. The 1960s brought a new generation of researchers who approached the mystery with different methodologies. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a primatologist from UC Berkeley, focused on the behavioral ecology aspects of Mountain Howler reports. Rather than searching for creature directly, Mitchell studied the environmental impact that such a large primate population would have on high-altitude ecosystems. Her findings were disturbing. Mathematical models showed that the reported frequency of sightings could only be sustained by a breeding population of at least several hundred individuals. Such a population would require significant food resources and would leave unmistakable traces in the form of habitat modification, waste products, and impact on prey species. Yet systematic surveys found no such evidence. Mitchell's conclusion was that either the mountain howler didn't exist as a physical creature, or it possessed behavioral adaptations that allowed it to live in the high Andes without leaving the ecological footprint that would be expected from a population of large primates. Both possibilities challenge fundamental assumptions about mammalian biology. The skeptic position received powerful support in 1972 when professional debunker James Randi offered a $50,000 reward for verifiable evidence of the mountain howler's existence. The challenge attracted numerous expeditions, but none succeeded in claiming the prize. Randi used the failures to argue that the creature was nothing more than a persistent myth perpetuated by wishful thinking and poor observation skills. However, the believer community pointed out that Randi's challenge criteria were so restrictive as to be nearly impossible to meet. The requirement for a living specimen or complete skeleton eliminated any possibility of success, given the remote and dangerous terrain where sightings occurred. Critics argued that Randi's challenge was designed to be unwinnable rather than to genuinely test the evidence. The conflict between skeptics and believers had transformed the mountain howler from a scientific mystery into a cultural phenomenon. The creature had become a symbol of the tension between established knowledge and the possibility of discovery, between the safety of accepted wisdom and the dangerous allure of the unknown. The dawn of the digital age brought unprecedented tools to the mountain howler investigation, but it also brought the most compelling evidence, yet that something extraordinary was hidden in the high Andes. In 1987, NASA's Landsat satellite program began producing high-resolution images of previously inaccessible mountain regions, revealing anomalies that had been invisible to ground-based observers. Dr. Robert Kellerman, a remote sensing specialist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, was analyzing Landsat data for geological survey purposes when he noticed unusual patterns in the Cordillera Huayhuash region of Peru. The infrared imagery showed heat signatures in areas where no natural phenomenon could account for thermal anomalies. More intriguingly, the heat sources appear to move in coordinated patterns over time-lapse sequences spanning several months. Kellerman's initial reports were met with skepticism from his colleagues, who suggested various technical explanations for the anomalies. However, when similar patterns appeared in satellite data from multiple mountain ranges across South America, the possibility of equipment malfunction became increasingly unlikely. The heat signatures showed characteristics consistent with large warm-blooded creatures, but their behavior patterns didn't match any known wildlife. The breakthrough came in 1993, when advances in digital image enhancement allowed researchers to extract previously invisible details from decades of archived satellite photography. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a computer vision specialist at MIT, developed algorithms specifically designed to identify large bipedal movement patterns in satellite imagery. When applied to Landsat archives dating back to the 1970s, the results were startling. Vasquez's analysis revealed what appeared to be regular migration routes through the Andes, with movement patterns that suggested intelligent navigation around human settlements and industrial activities. The creatures, whatever they were, seemed to possess detailed knowledge of human activity patterns and adjusted their behavior accordingly. They avoided areas during periods of high human activity and used natural corridors that provided maximum concealment from observation. The most remarkable aspect of Vasquez's findings was a consistency of the patterns across decades of data. The same routes were used year after year, with only minor variations that correlated with changes in human settlement patterns or natural disasters. This suggested not only intelligence but also cultural transmission of knowledge across generations of creatures. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in the 1990s revealed another layer of a mystery. The technology, originally developed for archaeological applications, showed extensive cave networks beneath the mountains that were far more complex than natural geology could explain. The cave system showed evidence of artificial modification, with chambers and tunnels that formed geometric patterns impossible to achieve without intelligent design and construction. The most significant breakthrough came in 1998 with the development of trail cameras equipped with motion sensors and infrared flash systems. These cameras, originally designed for wildlife research, could be left unattended in remote locations for months, automatically photographing anything that triggered their sensors. When deployed strategically throughout reported Mountain Howler territories, they began capturing images that changed everything. The photographs showed creatures that defied easy classification. They were clearly bipedal and covered in thick, dark hair, with anatomical proportions that fell somewhere between human and great ape characteristics. The creatures showed remarkable intelligence, often approaching the cameras and examining them carefully before moving away. Some images showed what appeared to be tool use, with the creatures manipulating objects in ways that suggested problem-solving capabilities. However, the trail camera evidence also revealed something disturbing about the creatures' relationship with technology. Many cameras were found damaged or destroyed after capturing images of the mountain howlers. The damage pattern suggested deliberate destruction rather than accidental contact, as if the creatures understood the purpose of the devices and were taking steps to prevent surveillance. DNA analysis technology reached the Mountain Howler investigation in 2001 when hair samples collected from trail camera sites underwent genetic sequencing. The results were unprecedented in cryptozoological research. The samples contained genetic material that was clearly primate in origin, but showed significant variations from any known species in the genetic databases. The DNA sequences contained markers that suggested evolutionary divergence from known primate lineages millions of years ago, far earlier than the human-ape split. Some sequences showed characteristics that appear to be adaptations for high-altitude living, including modifications to oxygen-carrying capacity and cold resistance that exceeded anything found in modern human populations adapted to high altitudes. Most remarkably, the genetic analysis revealed what appeared to be evidence of hybridization with human DNA. Small percentages of the genetic material matched human sequences, suggesting either interbreeding in the distant past or a closer evolutionary relationship than had previously been imagined. The implications for human evolutionary history were staggering. The genetic evidence attracted the attention of government agencies that had previously ignored the Mountain Howler phenomenon. In 2003, documents released under Freedom of Information Act requests revealed that the CIA had been monitoring Mountain Howler research since the 1960s, classifying as a potential national security issue due to its implications for understanding human origins and evolution. The declassified documents show that government interest in the Mountain Howler extended beyond academic curiosity. Military researchers have been investigating whether the creature's apparent adaptations for high-altitude survival could be reverse-engineered to improve human performance in extreme environments. The possibility of genetic engineering applications had transformed the Mountain Howler from a cryptozoological curiosity into a potential military asset. Advances in acoustic analysis in the early 2000s provided another piece of the puzzle. Digital recording equipment capable of capturing and analyzing the full frequency spectrum of the Mountain Howler's vocalizations revealed communication patterns that suggested language-like complexity. The sounds contained structural elements similar to human speech, including what appear to be grammar and syntax patterns. Dr. Sarah Hoffman, a linguistic professor at Stanford University, spent 3 years analyzing Mountain Howler vocalizations collected by various research teams. Her conclusion was that the creatures possessed a sophisticated communication system that showed characteristics of both human language and primate communication systems. The vocalizations contained what appeared to be specific terms for different types of threats environmental conditions, and even individual identification calls. The digital revolution had transformed the Mountain Howler investigation from anecdotal reports to hard scientific data. But the evidence raised more questions than it answered, suggesting that the creatures represented something far more significant than an unknown species of primate hiding in the mountains. As the 21st century progressed, researchers found themselves confronting a body of evidence that demanded radical reassessment of fundamental assumptions about evolution, human origins, and the nature of intelligence itself. The Mountain Howler was no longer just a cryptozoological mystery. It had become a window into possibilities that challenged the very foundations of scientific understanding. Dr. Michael Thornton, director of the Institute for Advanced Evolutionary Studies at Stanford, assembled the first comprehensive analysis of all available Mountain Howler evidence in 2007. His team included geneticists, anthropologists, linguists, behavioral ecologists, and computer modeling specialists. Their goal was to create a unified theory that could account for all the documented phenomena while remaining within the bounds of scientific possibility. The genomic analysis presented the most profound implications. The DNA sequences recovered from Mountain Howler samples showed characteristics that suggested an evolutionary pathway completely separate from known primate development. The creatures appear to represent what evolutionary biologists call a sister species, a branch that split from a human evolutionary line far earlier than previously thought possible, then developed independently for millions of years. But the genetic evidence contained anomalies that troubled the research team. Certain gene sequences showed signs of what appeared to be artificial modification, changes that were too precise and targeted to have occurred through natural evolutionary processes. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the project's lead geneticist, noted that some genetic markers resembled the results of advanced genetic engineering techniques that were beyond current human capability. The possibility that the Mountain Howler represented evidence of prehistoric genetic manipulation opened disturbing questions about the history of intelligence on Earth. If the creature's genetic modifications were artificial, who or what had possessed the technology to create them? The timescales involved predated human civilization by millions of years, suggesting the involvement of either unknown terrestrial intelligence or something far more exotic. Behavioral analysis revealed another layer of complexity. The creatures demonstrated problem-solving abilities that suggested intelligence levels comparable to early humans, but with behavioral patterns that were distinctly non-human. They showed sophisticated understanding of technology and human behavior, while maintaining what appeared to be a deliberately primitive lifestyle. Dr. Patricia Chun, a cognitive anthropologist on Thornton's team, developed a theory that the Mountain Howlers represented what she termed technological regression, a species that had once possessed advanced capabilities but had deliberately abandoned them in favor of a simpler existence. The evidence suggested that the creatures were fully capable of more complex behaviors, but chose to limit their technological footprint. This theory gained support from archaeological analysis of Mountain Howler habitat sites. The caves and shelters showed evidence of construction techniques that were far more sophisticated than necessary for basic survival. The engineering principles demonstrated knowledge of advanced concepts like structural load distribution, thermodynamics, and acoustic design that exceeded the apparent needs of primitive hunter-gatherers. Linguistic analysis of Mountain Howler vocalizations revealed patterns that supported the technological regression theory. The communication system showed what Dr. Amanda Foster, a Zen linguistics researcher, described as compressed complexity, a language structure that appeared simple on the surface but contained embedded layers of meaning that suggested much more sophisticated conceptual frameworks. The vocalizations contained what appeared to be technical terminology for concepts that had no equivalent in human languages. These terms seemed to describe spatial relationships, material properties, and abstract concepts that suggested the creatures possessed knowledge systems that humans were only beginning to develop. Yet, this advanced understanding was embedded within what appeared to be a deliberately primitive social structure. Computer modeling of Mountain Howler behavior patterns revealed another disturbing possibility. The creature's movement patterns, habitat selection, and interaction with human activity showed characteristics of what systems analysts call strategic invisibility, behavior designed to remain hidden while maintaining comprehensive surveillance of human activities. Dr. Richard Sterling, A military intelligence analyst who consulted on the project noted that the Mountain Howlers demonstrated tradecraft that would be impressive for trained human operatives. They showed understanding of human psychology, technology limitations, and surveillance techniques that suggested either extensive observation of human military and intelligence operations or independent development of similar methodologies. The implications were unsettling. If the Mountain Howlers possessed this level of strategic sophistication, their continued concealment was likely a deliberate choice rather than a result of their primitive nature. They were allowing themselves to be discovered to the extent that served their purposes while maintaining operational security that prevented full documentation or study. Ecological analysis revealed that the Mountain Howler population was far larger and more widely distributed than previous estimates had suggested. Genetic diversity studies indicated a breeding population of at least several thousand individuals spread across multiple mountain ranges throughout South America. This population was large enough to maintain genetic viability, but small enough to remain effectively invisible to conventional wildlife surveys. The creature's ecological impact was virtually nil, despite their size and apparent intelligence. They had developed what appeared to be a completely sustainable lifestyle that left no permanent traces on their environment. This level of ecological integration suggested either millions of years of coevolution with mountain ecosystems or conscious adoption of sustainability principles that exceeded current human environmental science. Most troubling were the temporal patterns revealed by comprehensive analysis of sighting reports. Mountain Howler encounters showed statistical correlations with periods of human technological advancement and social upheaval. Sightings increased during the Industrial Revolution, both world wars, the nuclear age, and the development of satellite surveillance technology. The correlation suggested either coincidence or deliberate monitoring of human technological development. The comprehensive analysis forced researchers to confront possibilities that extended far beyond the simple discovery of a new species. The evidence suggested that humanity shared the planet with another intelligence that possessed capabilities that were in some ways superior to human achievements, yet which had chosen to remain hidden while observing human development. The Mountain Howler mystery had evolved from a question of what is it to what does it want? The answer to that question would determine whether the creatures represented a fascinating discovery or a fundamental threat to human understanding of our place in the world. In 2015, everything changed. Dr. Maria Santos, a xenoarchaeologist from the University of Sao Paulo, made a discovery in the Peruvian Andes that would forever alter humanity's understanding of its own history and place in the cosmos. Deep within a cave system that had been sealed by an earthquake for over 10,000 years, Santos found evidence that the Mountain Howler mystery was connected to something far more significant than anyone had imagined. The sealed cave contained what appeared to be a repository, a carefully preserved archive of materials that had been deliberately hidden from the surface world. The artifact within defied conventional dating methods, showing characteristics that suggested technologies unknown to any human civilization. Most remarkably, the repository contained detailed records of interaction between early human populations and the creatures that would later be known as Mountain Howlers. The records, inscribed on materials that showed no signs of decay despite their apparent age, told a story that challenged fundamental assumptions about human development. They described the Mountain Howlers not as primitive creatures hiding in the mountains, but as the survivors of an advanced civilization that had existed on Earth millions of years before humans developed intelligence. According to the archive materials, the ancestors of the Mountain Howlers had achieved technological capabilities that far exceeded current human achievements. They had developed sustainable energy systems, genetic manipulation techniques, and what appeared to be faster-than-light communication methods. But their advanced civilization had been destroyed in a catastrophe of their own making, a technological disaster that had forced the survivors to abandon their achievements and retreat to the most remote areas of the planet. The archive revealed that the Mountain Howlers had been watching human development for millennia, serving as silent guardians who intervened only when necessary to prevent humanity from repeating their ancestors' mistakes. The Spanish conquistadors had encountered them during a period when European expansion threatened to disrupt delicate ecological balances that the creatures had spent thousands of years maintaining. Dr. Santos' discovery was initially met with skepticism from the archaeological establishment. The implications were so profound that many researchers refused to accept the evidence, arguing that the artifacts must be elaborate hoaxes or the result of misinterpretation. However, independent analysis by multiple institutions confirmed both the authenticity and the age of the materials. The genetic evidence found within the archive provided the final piece of the puzzle. The mountain howlers weren't just another species. They were the result of genetic modifications that had been performed millions of years ago by their own advanced civilization. They had engineered themselves for survival in extreme environments, trading technological dependence for biological resilience. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The archive contained genetic maps that showed clear evidence that human DNA had been influenced by mountain howler genetic material. Humanity itself bore the traces of ancient genetic manipulation, suggesting that our species had been guided or modified by the mountain howler's ancestors at some point in our evolutionary history. The implications were staggering. If the archive was accurate, then human civilization was not an independent development, but the result of subtle guidance by a species that had already experienced the dangers of unchecked technological advancement. The mountain howlers have been serving as invisible mentors, nudging human development in directions that would avoid the catastrophic mistakes that had destroyed their own civilization. Government response to Santos's discovery was swift and decisive. Within weeks of the initial publication of her findings, the cave site was declared a national security area, and access was restricted to authorized personnel only. Santos herself was recruited by an international consortium of intelligence agencies and research institutions, and her further work was classified at the highest levels. Leaked documents suggest that the discovery triggered emergency meetings between world leaders and the establishment of a new international organization dedicated to managing contact with the mountain howler population. The creature's advanced knowledge and their apparent role in human development made them potentially the most valuable resource on the planet. The first official contact occurred in 2017, though details remain highly classified. According to fragmentary reports, a team of scientists and diplomats succeeded in establishing communication with a mountain howler group in the Bolivian Andes. The encounter reportedly lasted several days and resulted in the exchange of information that has influenced human policy in ways that remain unknown to the general public. Subsequent contacts have been carefully managed and kept secret from the world population. The mountain howlers, according to leaked intelligence reports, have agreed to limited cooperation with human authorities in exchange for guarantees that their territories will be protected and their existence will remain officially denied. They have reportedly shared selected technological insights that have accelerated human development in renewable energy, medical research, and sustainable agriculture. The relationship between humans and mountain howlers has entered a new phase that combines cooperation with carefully maintained secrecy. The creatures that once terrified Spanish explorers have become humanity's secret partners in navigating the challenges of technological advancement and environmental sustainability. But questions remain about the long-term implications of this relationship. The mountain howlers possess knowledge and capabilities that could transform human civilization, but they also represent a reminder that intelligence and technology are not guarantees of survival. Their own history serves as a warning about the dangers that await any species that fails to balance advancement with wisdom. The mountain howler mystery has evolved from a cryptozoological curiosity into one of the most significant secrets in human history. The creatures that haunt the high Andes are not monsters or myths. They are the keepers of knowledge that could determine whether humanity repeats the mistakes of the past or learns to avoid the catastrophic outcomes that destroyed an earlier intelligent civilization. The truth behind the mountain howler phenomenon is still unfolding, with implications that extend far beyond the mountains where they were first encountered. They represent both humanity's greatest opportunity and its most sobering warning, a reminder that intelligence without wisdom leads inevitably to destruction, but that redemption may be possible for those willing to learn from the failures of others. In the thin air of the Andes, where oxygen is precious and ancient secrets echo through the peaks, the mountain howlers continue their vigil. They watch over a younger species that is still learning the lessons they mastered through tragedy, serving as both guardians and guides for a civilization that may yet find a path to wisdom that their own ancestors could not discover. The howl that once terrorized conquistadors has become a call to awareness, a reminder that we are not alone in our struggles with the challenges of intelligence and technology, and that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources.